Washington needs to have several high-end defensive linemen at the top of their transfer portal wish list.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And just quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there. We're going to take a little bit of a break from any coaching rumors out there because we need to talk transfer portal. Washington is really in a great spot to make another major jump next season. And in order to do that, they need to flex some financial muscle in the transfer portal by adding several high-end targets. We'll talk about some of the general thoughts on that at the very end of the show. Talk about some of the offensive guys a little bit later on, because there's no bigger need right now for the Huskies than on the defensive line. And I pressed record literally seconds after my good buddy Andy Yamashita over at the Seattle Times announced that junior defensive tackle Bryce Butler reported, I should say, that junior defensive tackle Bryce Butler is set to enter the transfer portal when it opens on January 2nd. And this is by far the biggest loss we've seen for the Huskies so far in this transfer portal cycle. And it just kind of adds to the importance of what I wanted to talk about originally. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that right off the bat, because that is such a big part of what Washington needs to do to continue to improve under Ryan Walters and continue to make those next steps in the Big Ten, is by adding several impact high-end defensive linemen. And it's one of those things where we've seen it, right? We saw it in the games that Washington lost this year, whether it be Oregon, Wisconsin, Michigan, especially Ohio State. We saw it last year as well. What a good high-end defensive line in this conference can do. We saw it run through Washington's elite offensive line in the national championship. Yeah, there were a whole lot of holds and things that weren't called in that game that we don't need to get into. But that was such a big part of that, was that Michigan was able to rotate several high-end bodies, especially along the interior of the defensive line, which is what A, makes the Bryce Butler departure so unfortunate, but B, what also makes this so much more critical now. And I'm glad I pressed record when I did. So let's talk about a couple of these guys, because we talked about the general thoughts. I'm going to get into some more of that at the end of the show as well. But one guy who I'm really interested in, and I talked a lot about big game hunting and how that relates to the 2027 class on this show, as all you ever dares know. So I want to get into some specifics here, where the first guy I want to talk about is Mateen Ibirogba. I hope I got that pronunciation right, from Wake Forest, who is looking to spend his final year elsewhere. When you check out some NFL draft boards, he's pretty high on the list. But there are a couple of really intriguing higher end defensive linemen in this 2026 class that, like Peter Woods at Clemson is one that comes to mind. Caden McDonald at Ohio State being another. So I feel like with one more year, this guy is somebody who really could push his way into the first round conversation, because he didn't necessarily have the most productive year for Jake Dickert at Wake Forest. And now he can absolutely move up another level, whether it be Big Ten, SEC. And this is where Washington really has the opportunity to go out and look at a loss like Bryce Butler, who I think was going to be a big time impact piece for you in 2026, and say, okay, he's really talented, but now we can still go out and further upgrade, because I believe you need at least 3 bodies on the defensive line, whether it be 2 deep on the interior, 1 at edge, 2 edge, 1 interior, whatever it is you might be. I think you need at least 3 bodies, maybe even more now with this departure and still several weeks before the transfer portal even officially opens. So there are going to be way more names to talk about over these next couple of weeks, but this is one that I am particularly intrigued by, because he is the highest rated defensive lineman across 247 Sports on 3, whatever it is that you want to look at. And in order to be one of the nation's elite teams, one of the best teams in the Big Ten, these are the kinds of battles that you need to go and show you can win. We've seen what Texas Tech was able to do by going out and doing that this past year with guys like David Bailey. And Washington absolutely has an opportunity. We know they have the resources to do that. And if you're able to pair these kinds of players like Mateen, with what you have coming in the 2026 class with the JD Hills and Tiaimu Kaises and Derek Coleman Bruce's of the world, instead of throwing so much on their shoulders, by being able to lessen that blow a little bit with some of these guys who are 1-year transfer acquisitions, it adds so much to what Jedd Fisch wants to do in terms of his development plan. Instead of having to go from, senior to freshman, now all of a sudden, yeah, you're still jumping down a couple of levels in terms of years, but when you're pairing these guys with the players you already have on the roster, whether it be a Javon Parker, who hopefully is going to be much healthier coming into 2026, whether it be an Alinius Davis, who we know is going to be a big piece for this team, whoever it is that you want to say, Washington has a major need at this position, and they're going to have a major opportunity to go out and cash in on that through the transfer portal. And with how you've recruited the defensive line so far in this 26 class, and then you look ahead to 2027 and some of the big time names that we've talked about on the show that the Huskies are in on, all of a sudden you can ease that transition into this next wave of Husky pass rushers by supplementing through the transfer portal. So Mateen Ibirogba is a guy who I'm absolutely going to be keeping an eye on. I don't think any of these battles by any stretch of the imagination would be easy to win, but I think that that's one of those guys who I wanted to throw some of these players out more so as examples of this is the expectation. This is what you need to go do if Jedd Fisch, who talked about potentially making the college football playoff next season, if he wants to make that a reality, these are the kinds of players that he needs to make sure that his coaching staff goes out and acquires, whether it be paying the most money for them, which again, I'll dive into later, or just selling them on being the best fit. Because one person who I believe his best fit might be at Washington is Jamarrion Harkless from Purdue, where he's somebody who is a true nose tackle by trade, listed at 6'3", 345 pounds. He's got a couple of years of eligibility remaining, where the production might not necessarily be there. But again, at nose tackle, that's not necessarily what you look for the most. 13 tackles this season, 2.5 sacks. It's certainly a solid profile for what Ryan Walters needs in the middle of his defense. And something I've talked about a lot on this show is how he has philosophically changed his defense to fit his scheme a little bit better. And adding a guy like Jamarrion Harkless, or just a nose tackle in general, who can give you a little bit of push right up the middle, just also gives you so much in terms of how you can now go back to some of those 5-down looks that you like, which make it easier for some of these younger edge rushers, whether it be you want to rely on guys that are already on the roster, a Hayden Moore per se, Devin Hyde, Victor Sanchez Hernandez, Caleb Smith, one of those guys take a jump forward alongside these 2026 guys. All of a sudden, those 5-down fronts make it a little bit easier to do that, but you need a high-end nose tackle who can absolutely not just take on double teams in the run game, but give you some kind of push in the pass game. And I feel like Jamarrion Harkless might be a really interesting example in that department. I also want to talk about edge rusher really fast, where I don't think we've seen any of the high-end names really hit the portal just yet. Right now, the top-ranked guy, according to On3's board, is Adam Trick from Miami, Ohio. This is the kind of player that you really need, whether it be a mid-major guy looking to make that step up for his final year of eligibility, or maybe a high-end former, 4 or 5-star recruit kind of guy who's just looking for a much better situation and better coaching. I feel like whatever the case may be, this is why I wanted to go with Adam Trick. This is where you really need to go out and shell out big money, because we saw solid production from the edge rushers at different points this year, whether it be Zach Durfee, Jacob Lane. We saw Deshaun Lynch just go absolutely bananas when it comes to batting down passes and everything like that. But with Adam Trick, with 59 tackles, 8.5 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles this year for Miami of Ohio, as you look at just guys in that department, that is what you're looking for in terms of the production. Because when we've seen now Washington over the last couple of years have their leading sack man have less than 5 on the season, that's an issue in several different departments, especially when you consider some of these pass rushes that you're going to go up against in the Big Ten and how this offense has looked in big games so far this season, where it's been stagnant. Game-changing pass rushers can be the great equalizer for you in those sorts of moments. And even in a game where, the offense does rise to the occasion, which we would certainly hope in some of those bigger moments next year, a game-changing pass rusher obviously is just never a bad thing in the first place, but you need somebody who can really just flip the field for you in an instant with a sack fumble. And I'm not saying that Washington doesn't have that kind of talent on the roster, but you need to continue leveling it up. That is the most important thing about playing in this conference, is continuing to stack talent and add bodies and add high-end bodies and let the cream rise to the top from there, which is something I absolutely believe this coaching staff understands and will do moving forward. That's the biggest need on the defensive side of the ball, but let's talk about the offensive side. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, it's time to do one of my absolute favorite things, talk wide receivers, because as we look at the offensive side of the ball, I'm a little confused as to what Washington's transfer portal strategy might be at this point in time. I'm going to do a more complete portal wish list show as we start to see more and more entries, as we will, not just at Washington, but around the country. And as I look at the offensive side, the one thing that really stands out to me is that I believe you need an experienced wide receiver. I'll start with Denzel Boston here, because I've seen a lot about, maybe he'll enter, maybe he won't, and he'll decide to come back to Washington for the 2026 season instead of going to the NFL draft. I'm still fully of the mind that he is going to enter the draft. As I look at walking on senior day, how he was able to get back for that Oregon game, play in the bowl game, all that sort of stuff. I believe that Denzel Boston will enter the NFL draft, but if he doesn't, I think this whole conversation is null and void. So I just want to get that out right there off the top, because obviously he would be better than having any transfer portal acquisition outside of, I really don't think that just because of his knowledge of the system, even if you include Nick Marsh, the Michigan State wide receiver, in this conversation, I would probably still take Denzel Boston, again, because of his just passion for Washington, knowledge of the system, all that kind of stuff. But Nick Marsh would absolutely, and I know this is not a shock to anybody, any everydayers out there listening to this, that Nick Marsh would absolutely be the number one target for Washington if things change with Denzel Boston and he does decide to enter the draft. I look at what Marsh brings to the table at 6'3", and he is the perfect fit for what the Huskies need, because I look at the X position now, and I'm certainly very encouraged about where it's going. We're bringing in Jordan Clay and Blaise LaVista at the position. I love what Justice Williams brings to the table. I'm certainly very encouraged with what Deji Jose is as an athlete and where he could be as we get into spring practice. So I think that position is certainly coming along, but a lot like I talked about at cornerback on yesterday's show, you absolutely need more experience at the position. So why not just talk about the top name on the board, where he was fairly productive this season at Michigan State? Obviously, they were a mess in and of themselves. 59 catches, 662 yards, 6 touchdowns. So there's certainly a lot to like about his game when you think about what a traditional X receiver is in this Jedd Fisch offense. It's someone who can stretch the field vertically and also go up and win those contested catch balls. I love what Nick Marsh brings as a route runner. I think he's a really, really talented prospect. I know, super shocker there. Top 10 player in this transfer portal, no matter what metrics you're looking at. I just think that this is one of those guys who, again, it all ties back to what I want to talk about later on and flexing financial resources. If you can go out and just add some of these top players in the transfer portal for one season as you continue to bring along this 2026 class, maybe you just don't have to ask nearly as much of them as true freshmen, as, again, I talked about earlier with Jedd Fisch believing that his team can make a push for the college football playoff in 2026. Having some of these more experienced guys is so, so important in that regard. And Nick Marsh is that perfect kind of guy where you look at the other positions on the field, whether it's Rasheed Williams, Desmond Roebuck, Raiden Vinesbright, Chris Lawson, whoever else you want to talk about in terms of some of these younger or more inexperienced receivers. In Williams' case, since unfortunately he was hurt and missed most of the 2025 season, there is so much to like about the talent in Washington's wide receiver room, but there isn't that true alpha receiver if Denzel Boston leaves for the draft. I think Nick Marsh could absolutely be that guy. And if you're able to go out and secure a player of that caliber, because again, we don't know what all the transfer portal entries are going to look like by the time it officially opens on January 2nd. There could be so many more names that you could go and make a big push for, but you just need someone in that mold, in my opinion, because you look at the way the rest of this offense is constructed. There are so many other players in that mold of, 5'10" to 6 foot who can move, play that Z or that slot position for you and be really productive. I'm not trying to knock those players in any way, but when you have someone who can really tilt the field, like Denzel Boston, like Roma Dunze before him, that is the kind of thing that just the kind of player that can really change an offense. And I think that Washington is lacking in that department right now. That's not to say that Jordan Clay doesn't come in here in January, and then by the time you get on the field for spring practice in late March, early April, whenever that might be, is one of those guys where you look at him and you just, that guy's different. Like I remember watching Jeremy Bernard when he came back in 2023, and we already saw a whole lot of talent on that field, right? Between Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Roma Dunze. But you looked at Jeremy Bernard and what he brought to the field in terms of his athleticism and his size and everything. He's just a very differently built player from Rome or any of those other guys. And it was, that guy is very clearly different. And that's what you need. You just need one of those different kinds of athletes to help really elevate the rest of this room. And I fully believe that Nick Marsh could wind up being that guy. And I'm curious to see how Washington goes about attacking the wide receiver position through the transfer portal. One other name I certainly want to mention in that same regard is the nation's most productive receiver this past season, Danny Scudero from San Jose State, 88 catches, 1,291 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I'm very intrigued here because it's something I talked about on yesterday's show. As you ever dares know, I'm not going to be surprised if a wide receiver, maybe even two, decide to enter the transfer portal with just how stiff the competition is there. And it's not to say that whoever that might be wouldn't be up for the competition, but maybe it's just someone is looking for somewhere where they can get on the field a little bit faster and they're a little bit more buried on the depth chart. And Danny is the perfect guy in that regard. He's listed at 5'9", 174 pounds, where he just finds ways to get open. And a lot in the same vein of what Desmond Roebuck has brought to the field for you this year. I think he's a similar caliber of athlete, maybe even a little bit better in terms of his breakaway speed. But with what Danny Scudero brings to the table, if that's a guy who you make a call on, it's, oh yeah, I'm super interested in what your offense has to offer for a guy like me, you get him on a visit as soon as you possibly can in terms of the production that he was able to show this past season. And I feel like his skill set might be a little bit redundant in terms of how many other guys you have in that room that fit that mold and fit that body type. But again, it's about leveling up and bringing in top competition year in and year out at that position. And he's someone who I absolutely believe would continue to just elevate what Washington is looking for from the wide receiver position. And with next season, again, with the lack of a true alpha receiver, where I certainly believe it still just kind of fits that X mold a little bit better. If you're able to bring in more guys in that regard, in that vein, who can just give you some versatility and some multiplicity on offense and, whatever packages you want to roll out there. If you want to run more 4, maybe even 5 wide receiver sets, because you just have so much talent in the room, adding more players in this regard is never a bad thing. And I'm just curious to see what Washington wants to do, because I look at running back right now, tight end, offensive line. I just don't think you need a lot of help at those positions, because you look at running back and there's certainly no need to go out and get a high-end guy or even really a depth piece at this point in time with what you believe Jordan Washington can bring to the table, and Brian Bonner and Quade Carr, Julian McMahon, Ansu Sanoe, whoever it is that you might believe can contribute behind Adam Muhammad in 2026. There is an argument to be made that that guy is already on the roster and you don't need to go find that. I feel like you can say the same thing at tight end with what we've seen from Bear Naone down the stretch. I'm very encouraged by him. I look at Kekua Amua as that blocker that you're looking for, and he certainly just physically looks like he can fit right in at the college level immediately. So very intrigued there. I think the offensive line is pretty much set as well. If you want to go add in depth, an experienced depth guy, I don't think that's a problem. But with Garrett Hatchett getting a waiver to come back, I certainly wouldn't expect that at this point in time. The one position I'm really interested in is quarterback. This is certainly a longer conversation for another day, but it's something I just wanted to put on your radar, because as I look at this quarterback room, I think you have a fair amount of talent. where Kai Horton has graduated behind Damon Williams, who there's no question about him starting in any way, shape, or form. It's Dash Byerly, it's Treston Keeney-McMillan, it's Derek Zammit. Again, I think there's a lot of talent between those three guys. Treston Keeney-McMillan is someone who's certainly impressed in terms of spring and fall camp and his just absolute gunslinger mentality and just how well he fits the Jedd Fisch offense. But I sit here, and the more I think about it, the more I'm just kind of like, do you go get another Kai Horton? Because you very clearly weren't afraid to have 5 quarterbacks on the roster this past season. I think some of this might also depend on Shake Highkendall and if he returns from a season-ending injury and decides to continue playing football, or maybe he just chooses to medically retire and stay as part of the coaching staff, which is what he was doing this past season while dealing with an injury. I look at it, and if there's another Kai Horton level transfer out there where it's somebody who's got a little bit of experience, mainly as a backup quarterback, and kind of just wants to come in, learn the offense, and be a reliable option if you need him for a couple of drives. Obviously you never wish injury on anyone, but if you want somebody just with a little bit more experience in that department, I'm curious to see if Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff decide that is a route that they want to explore. I think there's a non-zero chance of that at this point in time, where, again, I like all the talent of all the quarterbacks in the room, but with just a whole bunch of guys who have taken minimal snaps at the college level, it's certainly something I wouldn't rule out. But as we think about all of those players that I've talked about today in terms of who Washington could be targeting in the transfer portal, or maybe they should be, it all comes down to one thing at the end of the day, and that's money. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Omaha Steaks. The holidays are here, and whether you're hosting family, planning the perfect gift, or just trying to keep things simple and delicious, Omaha Steaks is making it easier than ever. From effortless holiday entertaining to unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience straight to your door. And what makes it even better, with Omaha Steaks, you always know exactly what you're getting. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, gourmet sides, and decadent desserts that make anyone feel appreciated. I love how easy it is to gift. They show up frozen, packed beautifully, and ready to cook. Steaks are perfectly aged and insanely tender. It's restaurant level quality at home. They have so many options: steaks, burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, desserts. There's something for every kind of holiday gathering. Save big on gourmet gifts and holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com, and for an extra $35 off, use code COLLEGE at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. I know it's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about these sorts of things sometimes, because it is still weird to get used to this new world of college football where so much of things can be about money at a certain point in time. And Washington, I feel like they've done a really good job of going about things the right way in terms of putting a lot of focus on retaining your current roster and then supplementing with pieces from the transfer portal. So this is where I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like as it relates to the portal in 2026, because something we've talked about a lot here on this show is the building blocks that you have at every single position on the roster, with guys who've played in big roles this year that are going to be back for 2026, where we don't need to necessarily run through all the names, because now it's about finding ways to improve on that and continue to get better. Where, again, Jedd Fisch has talked about the goal for 2026 being the college football playoff and continuing to improve. And you're on the right trajectory for that, finishing the season at 9-4. Now it's about getting over the hump and winning games against the best teams in the conference, where you look at 3 of the 4 games you lost this year, and it's the teams that ended the season ranked in the top 20. 2 of them are in the college football playoff. So it's very clear that you're headed in the right direction. And there are certainly other things we can talk about as it pertains to some of those games in terms of the slow starts offensively, the inability to overcome some of these elite programs. But I think some of that can certainly be just, I don't want to say blamed on, but just kind of attributed to the youth of the roster, where so many of these players, it was their first time experiencing some sort of game like that. Or, in the case of Damon Williams, where he got that start against Oregon last year, and it looked different this year in terms of what the offensive line was and different things like that. But again, that's all a separate conversation for a separate day. But the reason I wanted to make sure that I brought all of that up, because as it pertains to the 2026 season and what the goal is and should be for this team in terms of taking another step forward, you need to go out and show that you are willing to do whatever it takes to do that. Where one of the reasons I wanted to talk about all of these top names in the transfer portal as of this moment is not just because they would certainly be good fits on this Husky roster, because that is obvious more so, right? But it's because Washington has what it takes to go out and get some of those guys. And it's a matter of making sure you can do that. Where if you go out and you, let's say you offer the most for any one of these guys, let's just say Nick Marsh, for example, and he chooses to go somewhere else where he believes it might be a better fit, or he won't have to fight for playing time, whatever it is. That's one thing. And that's certainly a conversation that still needs to be had. But if you are going out there and giving the best offer to a lot of these guys in the transfer portal, I feel like with what this roster is, with what this coaching staff is, and where things are going, you are going to win those battles more often than not. So it's about finding ways to prioritize a lot of these players and just continuing to take that next step forward and selling them, however that might be. Again, whether it be financially or through other matters, because I look at this team and I really am encouraged by everything we saw from them this season and where it can continue to go with another year of experience under their belts. Where, I think about these two true freshman All-Americans that you have in Ryland Dillard-Allen at safety and John Mills along the offensive line, and what both of those guys are going to look like as sophomores. The production that we saw from Adam Muhammad as a true sophomore, and Desmond Roebuck as a true freshman, Dylan Robinson, who made 5 starts at cornerback for the injured Jacario Davis, what that guy is going to bring to the table. And I think Dylan Robinson is a great example of, that's a guy who it's very clear that you are going to be able to rely on him in 2026. And while he's really exciting, when we saw Leroy Bryant enter the transfer portal, as you dares know, I did talk about this a little bit on yesterday's show, but as we see what Dylan Robinson can be as a true sophomore, why would you want to just all of a sudden throw that guy into the fire and say, hey, he's going to be our CB1 next year, and we're going to kind of leave him on an island, and maybe it's, Elias Johnson, who will be in his 3rd year as a sophomore. Maybe he wins that job, or Ramons Adams or Rajon Duncan, just naming somebody from every class at that point. Maybe they win that job, and it's an inexperienced guy with certainly a lot of talent, but a lot of growth to do. Why not just supplement the roster by going into the transfer portal and saying, okay, let's offer whatever amount of money it might be to go get one of the top corners and bring him to Washington for a year. And we can still rotate in a Rajon Duncan or Ramons Adams or what have you, while still just knowing that you can rely on high-end players that can do their jobs for a short period of time as you look to achieve that goal and continue to get to the next level. I think that that is a really, really important part of what needs to happen, because again, Washington has the resources to make this happen. If you don't believe me, go look at that 2026 class. That is absolutely a big part of it. That's not everything, right? When you look at Derek Coleman-Brusa, he talked about it on this here show, that money was certainly not going to be the driving factor in any decision of his. When you look at the recruitment of Cody Green, I don't think money was the end all be all at the end of the day. But if you don't think that it took, certainly at the very least a similar offer to what Baylor was giving to get Jordan Clay to flip his commitment, or to get Trez Davis out of Louisiana, or to get Brian Bonner or JD Hill, money is certainly going to be a factor at the end of the day. And the fact that you were able to go out there and make those offers to those high school kids to get them in the door is great. Where Jedd Fisch said that he wants to, in terms of proportions, give about 30 to 35%, I believe is what he said during one of his press conferences, to the freshman class, because making sure that you can pay more to get them in the door is really, really important. And then, in terms of what the revenue share salary cap is, it goes down a little bit for sophomores and juniors, and then it goes back up for seniors, because how important having a lot of those guys in your program is. So I think that this is one of those things where it's very clear that Washington understands the importance of experience and age when it comes to building a roster, and that you can't just rely on these young guys to do everything. And again, that's where the money comes into play. That's where we look at just what this team needs to do and what its goals are, again, should be, and how to get there. It's about going out and making sure that you can secure some of these names. And Adam Trick, it's so clear what a high-end edge rusher could do to transform this defense. Somebody who can, again, like I said earlier, just take over a game and flip the field and get that sack on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, whatever. Somebody who, if that guy is in one-on-one against an offensive tackle, that he is going to win that battle more often than not, and you can trust him to get a stop when need be. That was something that more often than not, also, we just did not see this season. So you need to understand where those deficiencies are, which is why I wanted to start with the defensive line, see how it all ties together here. And that is where you go and make the biggest upgrade, because you look at the offensive line, you don't necessarily need a lot of help there. You went and did the right thing in the portal this past year and got Carver Willis, who was more than admirable as a stand-in for one season at left tackle. He was tremendous in his role. And now you were able to grow and get those guys, like whether it be John Mills, who kicks out to a tackle spot, or whether Cody Green comes in and just takes over, whatever that might be, you have the necessary resources now to allocate that elsewhere. And I think that's a really important part of this, because again, the defensive line is where you're going to need to spend the majority of resources in this cycle, just in terms of what you need most going into next season and how an elite pass rush can just really help you achieve your goals. Because I look at the game against Wisconsin being the most obvious example here, but even the game against Oregon, and when you were able to generate a little bit of a pass rush and how that game looked and how you were so close to swinging that game and having an opportunity to have the ball and go drive down the field and win the game with what that crowd felt like and how that stadium was rocking at that point in time. And you just weren't right that pass rush needed. And Dante Moore had all the space in the world to step up and make a clean throw to Malik Benson over the middle. Those are the kinds of things that can change a season. And when you look at the Wisconsin game, that's how that season got changed, because Wisconsin had a pass rush that was able to get home whenever it needed to. And as we continue to, again, look towards the future and look towards what Washington can be in 2026, this is how you do it. You need to go look at all of these teams around the country. It's not you need to go, throw out major bags for everybody in the portal every single season. No, because you already have a very solid foundation on your roster. That is what we learned this season about the Huskies, that everything you need to succeed is there. And now it's a matter of moving forward and using the portal to supplement these building blocks that you already have, whichever one it is that you want to point to and say, I believe that guy is elite and that guy can help take this program to the next level. Help him. Don't make him do it all by himself. Go out and find a way to help all of the players in the room elevate their game to the next level by bringing in somebody for that, to use the coach speak term, the iron sharpens iron, the elite competition to have on a day in, day out basis and learn from guys like that. That is what you need to continue to elevate this roster and move forward. And the more resources you have and allocate towards that department, the better you're going to be. And the better that I feel like this coaching staff and this fan base are going to feel about where this program is headed coming into 2026. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.